Sometimes you're the person who's tried to save face in front of everybody while everything's on fire in the background and won't ask for help. That's a bad boss. Hey, a bad boss takes credit for everything and gives none to anyone else.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Aging Entrepreneur, and we're back with episode 7, and I've named this one "Stop Being a Bad Boss." And I think, Nick, like you've heard me talk about having bad bosses. I think you've probably had bad bosses. Well, actually, I think everybody probably that's listening has had a bad boss.
No doubt about it. It's the nature of the word boss.
Right. We were actually joking on the previous episode, which please go back and take a listen to that to the dishwasher. It's pretty good. But talking about how the negative connotation toward the word boss, like in our culture here, we have leaders and team members and stuff like that. In a lot of typical environments, you have bosses and employees or subordinates, which...
Oh, God. Do people use the word subordinates?
That's the thing. I distinctly remember when I was taking a management class at UAB, subordinates was like a common name.
Right.
And when I hear that, it just means like you're just a lower level person. You don't matter.
It's like a caste system. You're always going to be that. What is it, Aladdin?
Oh, yeah.
You're nothing but a street rat.
Yeah,
Only
exactly.
Fleas will mourn you.
Yeah, so
That's exactly what I think too when I think of a boss.
fleas will mourn. That's fantastic. Anyway, but here we are. So we're talking about stop being a bad boss. Sometimes, and just like the previous episode, you may fall into this role by accident. Like you don't mean to do this, but you sometimes will place the business above the people, and then you become the bad boss, where to the point where people may resent you. I'll tell you this: if you have a lot of high turnover in your company, take a look at yourself first, because there's maybe something going on.
Let's brainstorm real quick. We've never done this real quick. Kind of like a lightning round. First thing that pops in your mouth. First thing that pops in your head.
We may have to pause the recording here.
All right, I'm serious. Like, first things that come to your mind when you think of a bad boss. We'll just go back and forth. Bad boss, go.
Abuse my time.
Perfect. Bad boss for me, won't correct their team members when they're doing something wrong.
Ooh, that's a pretty good one. For me, getting random texts on the weekend or basically being yelled at.
For me, being someone's best friend rather than leading them well.
I like how yours is like not negative on the face of it, but actually really negative on the back end.
That's because the things that you experienced are very different than the things that I experienced.
I gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
We're coming from two completely different backgrounds, right?
Yeah, 100%. Now I'm thinking like a bad boss can mean so many different things. Because you're right. Because my view of a bad boss is like legitimately a bad person.
That's right. That's right. But there's so many levels to leading people that really, I mean, sometimes you're just an arrogant jackwagon, and sometimes you're that cuddly teddy bear with no spine.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? Sometimes you're the person who's tried to save face in front of everybody while everything's on fire in the background and won't ask for help. That's a bad boss. Hey, a bad boss takes credit for everything and gives none to anyone else.
Oh, I should write that one down.
Right? So these are things that happen that are just so much more than what you think of or what I think of. I mean, there's somebody riding in their car right now going, "Y'all still haven't covered the one that's my boss. That's good. That guy or that girl is X, Y, and Z." Hey, let's talk about that. You know, here's an interesting thought on a bad boss. There were women in leadership roles. In my opinion, being a guy, y'all are going to blow me up if you're a woman listening to this, and I get it. But have always come across very different than the men in leadership. And I've had good in both. Let me be very clear about that. Laura Scotty, to date, is one of the best bosses I've ever had, one of the best leaders I've ever had. Jennifer Papke, one of the best bosses, one of the best leaders I've ever had. But when I was at Coca-Cola, oh my gosh, the women in leadership in that company, I don't know, they were different, man. Yeah. It was like they were out to prove something by just murdering everybody. It's crazy the way they acted. And then here's the deal. Like, the guy bosses, my men bosses at Coca-Cola were exceptionally awesome, but my guy bosses in radio,
No.
not so much. Power tripping.
Well, and
environments.
I think that breaks down to it doesn't matter the gender. It matters the priorities and values that they have in place or what they've been trained to do as a boss.
Fair enough.
Yeah, because like reality is the expectation of what a boss like if you're in a like for instance let's ignore the business owner for a second here, but if you are a boss role in a company, you were probably trained by that company to do X, Y, Z as a boss, and that's all you know. You don't know if it's good or bad. It's what you know and what you do, and you're actually like judged by it because somebody higher up has forced that down the line. So I really think gender-wise, it could. I think the challenge with gender, of course, is that sometimes being a boss like a female could come off a lot differently than being a boss like a male. But ultimately, like it's how they interpret it. Like someone that just says, "I'm just doing." If you have a boss or you are the boss that looks at numbers and nothing else, you suck.
No doubt about it.
Like there's an important part to that, but you just ignored your people. They're no longer people to you. They're just dollar signs.
Hey, I've literally heard it said that people are units of production.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
That's debilitating to me just to even think about it.
It doesn't make sense to think.
Well, when I was at Coca-Cola, they would always ask me, "What's your badge number?" Like, what's your employee number?
Yeah. Who are you?
Yeah, they didn't know who I was, and that's fine. That's a massive company. Walmart's probably like that, and I've never worked at Walmart. I have no idea how they are, but I mean, you're Michael Ray. Mm-hmm. You're not employee 2. You know what I'm saying? Like that's.
Well, it was like Austin Powers. What was the number 2 guy?
Who does number 2 work for? You show that turn, who's boss? It's one of the best scenes in cinematic history, or at least comedic cinematic history.
That's so fantastic.
God, that was a good movie. But yeah, it's funny. I had a neighbor. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about, other than I had this neighbor, Jim, an older guy from up north, just kind of brash. Loved him. Great neighbor. But I've got 3 boys. And he never called them by their name. It was number 1, number 2, and number 3. And hey, number 2, get over here. Hey, number 1, get back inside. Number 3, you're being too loud. Like never called them by their name. Now, how many people go to work and feel like number 1, number 2, and number 3?
I'm just trying to visualize that right now that somebody would call the kids that.
Right.
But then, yeah, I mean, that's crazy to think about. But the reality is like being called a number. You're just I'm going to replace you mentality. Because if you're just a number to people, or you're making all your people a number, well, then that means to them there's no value. Like I'm only going to put in what the minimum requirement I have, right? Because I have no point of being better.
That's right.
But so fantastic.
Well, I'll never forget. Mr. Crawford was the owner of Crawford Broadcasting, and he made a statement to me, and he wasn't being rude or mean, but I mean, the guy's probably in his late 70s, early 80s at the time we're having this conversation. That was 2-3 generations ago in thought process, right?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget him saying, an employee is only worth what it costs to replace them.
Wow.
Right?
That's kind of sad.
Well, I mean, he wasn't trying to be a jerk or anything. He was a businessman.
Yeah, I mean, and he's right in that capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I found that interesting. There's probably, we always talk about this gap between millennials and boomers, right? And here I am. I'm a Gen Xer, so like I'm smack dab in the middle. Like I'm awesome at everything, So go Gen
You're
X.
so awesome that it's a forgotten generation.
It's totally a forgotten generation. There's no doubt about it. Anyway, while boomers and millennials are fighting, we're over in the corner eating popcorn, laughing at them. So that's what we do. Anyway, with that being said, though, like there is this thought process and gap in thought process from the way like the boomer generation thinks about employees and the way the millennial generation thinks about employees and what that looks like. And what we would consider a bad boss, I would argue they consider as an outstanding boss.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So what is a bad boss? Well, that's completely up to perception, isn't it?
Well, and honestly, I think part of that too is what's your goal with your company, right? Are you focused on the dollar, or are you focused on your people? You know what? Because the reality is, if you're focused on the dollar, not your people, then your view of a bad boss is going to be a little bit different than if you're focused on the people.
There's some indicators on whether or not you're being a bad boss that are kind of like third party, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on what kind of business that you're in or what kind of business you run, but like, are your customers or your clients excited to do business with you?
Yeah.
Right? Well, if you're a bad boss and your team members are not excited to be there because they're being mistreated publicly, or I'm sorry, privately or behind doors or in team meetings or whatever, they're not going to go out and overserve your customers.
Yeah. I mean, and thinking about that, like it's hard if you work for a company or you are that boss that you may be bad, but not knowing it until you've heard these indicators potentially. Like if your employees aren't going the extra mile for your customers and they're just checking a box, that means they don't want to make you proud.
That's right.
Like they just want their paycheck and that's it.
That's right.
Yeah. Cause like the reality is like, or, you know, the other side of that too, I don't want to disappoint you essentially. Now a more deeper version of that though is like I'm afraid to disappoint you.
There's no doubt about that.
There's a scary side to that where you lead out of fear, and that can only go so far.
Do you have any examples of that? I'd be interested to unpack that a little bit.
Lead out of fear?
Yeah.
Well, I mean that's just I think a lot of people go through that in the sense of a good example. Previous company losing a client, the reaction from the boss was greater of a fear than the losing of the client itself.
Right.
And so much like a personal example in the sense of I would I would delay communication, not really hide it, but basically not reveal the issue until later because I had such a huge fear of the reaction that was coming.
Right.
So I think even to add a little more to that, if you have employees and bad things are happening, but they're not telling you until it's like well beyond where recoverable or anything like that, they just don't like if something happened on a Friday and they don't tell you till the following Friday about it because they're afraid to, or they just sit there and wait and never tell you until you find it and it's a consistent thing. That's a huge indicator that there's a problem.
I remember when you first started working with us, you had lost a client. Somebody had canceled. I don't remember who they are. I don't care. The point is I remember you bringing it to me, and it wasn't what happened when you told me. It's what happened after you told me, and you're like, wow, you responded way different than I thought you would.
Your first response was, "Are you okay?"
Yeah. You good, bro? It sucks to lose money.
Yeah, and then when I had to go through and lose a large client, it was well, I won't say who it was, but when I remember when we lost it, you're like, "Hey, let's go to breakfast."
Yeah.
And you're like, "I just want to check in." Like you're like, "I just want to check in on you. I could care less about that client or the money that was lost. We'll recover that, but how are you?"
Right.
I've never experienced that, and it's weird because and I still struggle with that. From like when we lose a client, like it's still like annoying, but at the same time,
It is.
It's annoying, but it's not. Oh crap! Nick's gonna light me up for an hour. That's not real, and I think that's important to note because it just encourages me to go find the next client that we can. As we've said in our company, saying no to one opportunity, saying yes to another one.
That's right.
And so when you're like losing a client, you're just saying yes to the next opportunity that can fill in that gap. Maybe that was like there's always like I was joking in the past episode. I got to fire a client, and it was kind of fantastic. But then also
probably knowing that there were no repercussions coming from the leadership of the team and doing so.
Well, even because we even had the discussion of like, yeah, that doesn't sound like a good fit for us type of thing, and then it just felt kind of good.
I know I dealt with this probably a month or two ago, we had a client that I've been going around in circles with whether or not we wanted to fire them. Just not because they're bad people or anything like that. They didn't do it. Like, it just wasn't a good fit. It was like dating somebody that you really didn't like that much. You know what I'm saying? It's like, why are we still doing this? Is it just comfortable? Like, whatever it is. Finally, they actually canceled services with us. But I think we had an office party over that one.
Yeah, we had a small celebration.
Yeah.
Came across that. And then we said, let's see if we can replace them.
Yeah, immediately you go do the work to make up the financial gap. But I believe that encouraged and strengthened the bond of the whole team. How you react to situations that can perceived to be negative, that's going to set the tone and the temperature of the office in most future things.
Yeah, and I think the other side of it too is that you need, like, if you react negatively to something, you're going to lose more and more communication with your team from an honest standpoint.
That's true.
Because they're afraid to tell you what they really think.
Right.
Or what they really think is skewed because they dislike you so much.
Right.
And I think one of the things that you've worked on, and I think we mentioned before in the past, you want us to tell you what's going on. You want us to tell you what you're not doing correctly or what we think you should be doing or whatever. Like, you're receptive to feedback, and you also act on feedback.
Well, so this is a really good example of a good boss, bad boss situation too. And what you're saying, yes, I do. I react and consider the feedback that I feel is the right feedback, and I take time to consider the things that I disagree with instead of just saying no.
Yeah.
Right.
But anyway, so going into that, I had some notes here about some stuff. Let's see. Yeah, so we've all heard this phrase, the customer is always right. If that is your mode of operation as your business, you're going to have some very resentful people in your company.
found that only customers feel that way.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of funny because, the reality is, you know what? Sometimes the customer is right. It should be admitted, hey, we screwed up. Now, if that's a common theme, you probably have a core issue to work on. But if you are sacrificing your employee to make the customer happy, or I've seen this happen to me, you blow up in front of the customer on the employee to make it look like you took care of the customer, it's terrible.
So I have to tell a story. I have to tell a story. It feels like a lifetime ago. I used to work at Costco. And before I got into the marketing side of Costco, I worked at the membership counter. And at the membership counter, obviously, we sold the memberships, but we also did the returns. And do you remember those big, huge box, TVs? Big ones,
yeah.
With
their own cabinets.
Rear projection, massive.
Probably weighed
things,
1,000 pounds.
Well, at the time, Costco had anything goes return policy. As long as you had a receipt, you could return it.
It was for years too, right?
Yeah, yeah. And this was back in 02, 03, 04, something like that. And for any reason, any time period, doesn't matter the length of time. And TVs were starting to all be flat screens, and they were starting to drop in price, right? Well, this guy had paid $6,000-$7,000 for this TV that he rolled in on 2 cards that had gone out, and he's I paid. I want to say it was $5,800 plus tax. It was $6,000.
Big purchase.
And I didn't say no to him. I said, I need to get a manager to approve this. This receipt is as old as I am. You know what I'm saying? Literally. It's from 91 or something. I'm older than that. But, it was such an old receipt. And that guy tore me up, man. He tried to pick a physical fight with me.
The customer?
The customer did. And this was me mentally checking out of this job when that manager came over and did everything he could to make that customer happy rather than tell him to hit the door and get out and don't ever come back for the way he treated me.
Don't mistreat my employee.
Yeah, he did not have my back. He was trained to take care of the customer, not to take care of the person that's behind that counter trying to take care of that customer.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I never forgot it. And it's not, I don't hold a grudge. I still like Costco. But at that point, I did not have respect for any of the leadership at Costco,
Yeah.
much less my boss.
Oh yeah, I mean that, and I think you can set a tone right there. Like if you have a customer, like a big customer. Now in that situation, it's funny that they wouldn't defend you when the customer's literally trying to get $6,000 out of Costco.
Well, not just trying, did. They went and bought a TV, a computer, like 2 or 3 other things with the money that they returned from that.
Yeah,
TV.
so like Costco lost on every aspect of that
Yeah,
deal.
there were including me.
Yeah, like everybody checked out mentally on that deal.
And ask that customer if they respect Costco after that.
I wonder even a member anymore.
Right?
They probably got rid of the return policy, and they're like, you know what? I'm done taking advantage of that system.
And I'm not trying to beat up Costco, man. Like, that's not my point. That was a failure of leadership at a Costco in Memphis. That had nothing to do with the company as a whole.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, that was a leadership principle that was fully realized throughout all the leaders or managers, if you will, bosses in my mind, in that company. And they didn't even know they were being a bad boss.
I mean, essentially, they put a value number on you of less than $6,000.
That's exactly what they did.
Like
And then beat me up for being 2 minutes late from a break.
yeah, that doesn't make sense,
Right? Like, come on, man. Are you kidding me?
So I mean, that goes back to, like, you know, in that situation, we're not even talking about like a boss of a company. We're talking about a manager that has people underneath him or her, and they had an opportunity to, like, if we flipped a coin and they defended you, you'd like, man, thank you. Like, you would go the extra mile every time for that manager and go up and if you ever heard anything bad about him, he's like, no, he's great, you know. But no, that didn't happen.
Well, so let's go through that exercise real quick. What would I, as a team member, you've heard the story. Working behind membership counter, guy comes in, gets irate to the point where he's trying to get me from around the corner to literally punch me in the face.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even making this up or exaggerating. To where my boss comes over and does everything he can to make that person happy.
Yep.
Rather than what I would like to have seen. Now, I'm not going to tell you what I would like to have seen, but I'm curious from your perspective, what would you think the right thing for a leader to have done in that situation?
Oh, in that situation, well, I guess it kind of depends how much I had seen going into it. But if it was like, if I walked into it blindly, I'd first like hear the customer say, "What's going on?" And it's like, you know what? There's a door right there. Take your stuff. Sorry this happened, but I can't let you treat my employee that way.
Okay, yeah. So you're pretty close to what I'm thinking too. It'd be, hey, look, first of all, you need to chill.
Yeah.
Right. What's going on that caused you to want to pick a physical fight with one of my team members? By the way, Nick, are you okay?
Yeah. Are you good, Nick? Nick, you're good to go.
You can step away. I got it from here.
Like, go take a break.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Or like, even, you know what? Rest of the day off, fully paid. See you tomorrow.
Yeah. There you go. Anything other than what I got. And then to look at that customer and say, our policy is to return this and we're going to do that. Are you going to chill? No. Because he wasn't mad at Costco. He was mad at me.
Yeah.
And had that guy continued, I would have said, no, we're not going to refund this money to you, and you can leave. Right there's the door, and your membership, we'll be happy to refund your money on your membership, but we're not refunding this TV. Would have been happy to do that, but you don't get to go.
But you're now banned.
Yeah, you're no longer a member here. Congratulations.
Yeah, you earned that spot.
That's right, because I also know that they reserve the right to revoke memberships. Anyway, we probably spent entirely too much talking about that, but at the beginning of this episode, we said, hey, what are the characteristics of a bad boss? We kind of brainstormed on that a little bit. Let's do another lightning round. What are some characteristics of a good boss?
Someone who listens and defends.
All right. Mine is somebody who, with compassion, corrects bad behavior.
That's pretty good. I would say someone who is willing to step out for the employee, like take the effort to, basically what we're saying, protect the employee.
Okay. I would say somebody who values the team and the culture over the client and the customer.
Oh, 100%. Like we talk about win-win here.
Yeah.
Having where, I mean, it's amazing how a bad customer can invade your culture and create, resentment again. But reality
That
is,
customer that quit would be the prime example of what you just said too. How can a bad customer invade the culture. That word culture, right? The cult word, that word culture, right? What is it doing? Is it tearing down or is it building up? Is it win-win? Because you remember, how long have we been like, oh God, it's that person calling again?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because, like, just to put in perspective here, so, like, our company, they're really, two major sides. You have sales and production. Honestly, that's probably with most service companies. You have sales and production. Well, if sales brings on a customer that's an utter nightmare to work with, but they're like, no, they're great. You just got to do your work. What's going to happen over time?
Yep.
Like, because I would even say, like, if you're in a situation, because you did this, right? So the customer that left, like, we brought in some extra help that wouldn't bear down our production team.
That's right.
To help prevent the hate, not the hatred, that's a strong word, but just the dislike and resentment toward all that. So, yeah, I mean, I just thinking about how that customer can definitely invade and actually destroy a culture. Like, because all of a sudden, if you keep that customer, like, let's say you bring in that customer and they really are a bad fit, but they're huge. Let's say they make up, let's never do this. Let's say they make up 50% of your revenue, which is terrifying. But you're sacrificing your team because the dollar amount is so good.
Right.
Because I think we experience that because sometimes we'll have a large, like if we have a large client and it's just a bad fit, but we're afraid to get rid of them because of the money that goes with it, right? But then if we have a good exit plan, we get rid of them the way we should, and we've already replaced that income. It's not that bad.
Right.
But yeah, I just thinking about because I think we've had a couple of customers like the one you mentioned, but I think we've had others too. And it's so funny because eventually, like, it works out where they just end up like it's almost like they know they're not a good fit type of thing, and they just end up going away anyway. Like it's pretty rare for us to have a great client that just leaves. Like,
yeah, I mean, you're right.
Like we have an occasional here and there, and that may be outside of like they want to stay with us, but they can't because of whatever reason.
Right.
But no, like the one I got to fire, like it was borderline mutual when there was discussion. Like they kind of knew they were screwing up, and they knew like we were frustrated and said this is a conversation had to be had, and boom, gone.
It was a pretty quick one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This isn't working out. No, it's not.
And the whole conversation, I think, was less than 5 minutes.
Right.
Because the guy had even asked us, how do you think things are going? And I was just like, to be honest, man, I don't think we're a great fit for y'all.
Right.
And then we went, and he's like, I'm kind of glad you said that. Cause he basically, he wanted to say that, but he was afraid to.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, it's just talking about how as a good boss, you see if something bad comes in, you work on getting rid of it so it doesn't ruin the whole crop.
Well, as people are transitioning into owning their own business from wherever they're coming from, they're going to take a lot of what they currently know and what they've experienced with their bosses into their own business. And Michael, I'm as guilty of this as anybody. I remember the first time I was in a position where I was going to let someone go.
Yeah.
And I just botched that so bad because I just didn't know. And the only thing that I had to draw from was past experiences, right?
Yeah.
When you own a business, it doesn't come with a playbook. It's much like having a baby. They don't come with instructions.
Well, I would even say like your first business is the sum of your experiences.
That's right. Unless it's a franchise, then you can tap into everything
else.
else.
You have a book.
That's
you
right.
Go to, and it's like, all right, this happens, do this. But
Yeah.
if your brand is your own business, no franchise, chances are whatever you know, good or bad, will be reflected in that business.
That's right.
And then as a owner, you have to remember to constantly grow yourself and educate yourself and get better at things so you will quit making the same mistakes that you were trying to get away from.
That's right. And the other thing that I would caution you against, again, starting your own business, is not to let the pendulum swing so far in the other direction either. Right? My boss was such a jackwagon. I'm never going to be like that. I'm going to be the coolest boss ever.
Never say never.
And then you never actually correct your team, and you don't know how to learn from failures, and you don't know how to grow through missed opportunities. And I did this. I'm telling you, it's going to happen anyway. No matter how I warn you against it, it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying, though, is at least you know in the back of your mind, hey, you're going to want to do things different than what you've come from, especially if it was a bad experience. And if it was a good experience, you're going to mess up too because you're not that person who led you. You got to come up with your own vibe, your own system, your own swagger, if you will, on how you're going to lead people. and it's going to be an accumulation of past experiences, good or bad.
Yeah. Well, and I even think too, when you think back, because the chances are you're listening to this episode and you're thinking back to some bad bosses that you've probably had or bad experiences, and sometimes that boss wasn't necessarily bad. They just had done so many other things that made everything that could have been good just look bad too.
That's right.
Because I know there are things in my previous company, it's weird to say, but I'm thankful that I went through the things that I did because it helped me prepare to where I am now. And I think that's important to note. And looking back, there were some good things and there were some bad things. But the bad things were so strong, I kind of associated everything as bad.
Right.
But the reality is there were some things I learned there that I brought over to this company that have been good.
That's no doubt about it.
It's just putting a different light on it.
That's right.
So, anyway.
But also, much like what I just said, letting the pendulum swing too far in the opposite direction. You have another podcast, Work-Life Balance. I would argue when you first started that podcast, if you were to go back and listen to what you and Michael were talking about,
yeah,
you may even disagree with what you said at the time you were saying it because you were swinging so far in the opposite
Oh,
direction.
yeah, we joke that podcast was like therapy to us because we were lashing out.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if I go back, because I think, because we started that 4 months after we had left, and so it was very fresh on us. And then also, it's something to kind of note about. Super fresh. We had lots to talk about, and then as time goes on, I texted him the other day, hey, we should record our episode soon, and then we were both like, what will we talk about?
You're right. And what's funny about that, I've listened to those episodes. They were really good.
By the way, it's really trippy that your I'll say new boss listens to how you disliked your old boss.
Well, I very rarely made comments on the episodes, Steve, right? I didn't want you to think I was just eavesdropping or anything, but I was looking for just as much on what not to do from those episodes because I may be your new boss, but I was also a new boss. You know what I'm saying? It's not like I had run a company with any kind of measurable success for any measurable amount of time, right? But going back and listening to those, or at least when I was originally listening to those, I was cringing on some of the things that not really as much you as your co-host would talk about. And I'm going, no, that's bad thinking. That's wrong. I totally get why you think that way. But y'all's audience wasn't geared toward me, the leader. It was geared toward other employees in bad situations. That was your audience.
Yeah.
And everything was geared about how the bosses are wrong or the company's wrong or this, that, and the other's wrong. And I totally understood where you were coming from because of the way you were treated.
Yeah.
Right?
It's what we knew.
Anyway, man, there's so many good nuggets in this episode. If you want to be a good boss, it's going to be because you're intentional about it.
Yeah, and not only intentional, but acknowledging it, acknowledging the good and the bad, and not afraid to reflect on what's happening. Because I think one thing that you do that's pretty interesting is you'll make a decision or want to make a decision, but you also listen for feedback. You don't do it blindly. You have counsel involved. You're part of multiple masterminds. You want to make sure you're not crazy, essentially. Am I making the right decision? And half the time, if you're asking yourself, am I making the right decision, you're doing a lot better than most. Because some are saying, I'm just making a decision. I know if you think that I know this is the right decision, you say it every single time, and you don't care what the results are because you made that decision, that's a problem. But when you're sitting there thinking, this is going to affect people, I need to make sure that I'm making the right decision.
No doubt about that.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. Great episode, Michael Ray.
Yeah, I had a lot to say with this one, obviously, from previous stuff. But at the same time, to our audience, this is your opportunity to shine, right? So I'd love for you guys to write in, tell us what you think is a good boss, right? And then let us know, you've had bad bosses, but if you were going to see things, do it your way, what would you do? How would you change that? But anyway, all right.
Don't just write it to us. Yes, write it to us, but also write it down.
Please write it down, because if you don't write it down, it kind of doesn't exist.
Well, look, great episode. Great chatting with you today. And we'll be back next week. But until then, y'all have a great week.
All right, see y'all.
If this podcast inspired you to take action as an entrepreneur, we want to hear about it. Send us an email, agingentrepreneur@gmail.com.
And if you like this episode, please consider leaving us a review or 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening to.
Until then, find your dream and keep chasing it.